In the dusty mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurks behind every rock, and trust is a luxury no one can afford, a simple medical convoy was about to become the stage for an impossible story. What started as a routine mission to deliver life-saving supplies to a remote village would end with enemy forces learning a lesson they'd never forget.
The driver they targeted wasn't just another aid worker. He wasn't just another soft target in a white vehicle marked with a red cross.
He was something they never saw coming, something that would turn their calculated attack into their worst nightmare. This is the true story of Marcus Thompson, a man whose past was buried so deep that even his closest colleagues had no idea who they were really working with.
A story where mercy and violence danced together in the mountain shadows, where a single decision made in seconds would echo across 2 continents and change the lives of everyone involved. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden.
Some people are meant to live quiet lives, but when innocent lives hang in the balance, some secrets have a way of revealing themselves in the most explosive ways possible. What happens when the hunted becomes the hunter? What happens when the enemy realizes they've just attacked the wrong convoy at the wrong time, with the wrong man behind the wheel?
This is that story. This is what happens when enemy forces attack a medical convoy, never expecting that the driver would be the last person on earth they'd want to mess with.
Marcus Thompson adjusted his rearview mirror for the 3rd time that morning, not out of vanity but out of habit. 23 years in special operations had trained him to check every angle, every shadow, every possible point of danger.
But that was his old life.
This was supposed to be his new one.
The white Toyota pickup truck bumped along the Rocky Mountain Road, its bed loaded with medical supplies destined for the village of Khost Matun. Red crosses painted on the doors and roof marked it clearly as a humanitarian vehicle. In the passenger seat, Dr. Sarah Chen reviewed her inventory list, completely unaware that her driver had once been one of the most feared operatives in the British SAS. Marcus had been driving for the International Medical Relief Organization for 8 months now. It was quiet work, peaceful work, exactly what his therapist had recommended after his discharge. Find something that helps people, she had said. Find something that builds instead of destroys. He thought he had found that something. The morning had started like any other at the IMRO compound in Jalalabad. Marcus arrived at 5:30, an hour before his shift began, and performed his ritual inspection of the vehicle. He checked the engine, the tires, the brake fluid, and the emergency radio. His colleagues thought he was overly cautious, but they didn't know that in his previous life, a poorly maintained vehicle could mean the difference between a successful mission and a body bag.
Dr. Chen climbed into the passenger seat at exactly 7 o'clock, as she did every Tuesday and Friday.
She was a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s, originally from San Francisco, who had joined IMRO fresh out of her residency. She believed deeply in the mission of bringing medical care to those who needed it most, regardless of politics or borders.
"Morning, Marcus," she said, settling into her seat with a travel mug of coffee. "Ready for another adventure?" Marcus started the engine and smiled. It was the same gentle smile he gave everyone at IMRO, the smile of a man who seemed incapable of violence. "Always ready, Doc. Weather looks good for the drive." What Dr. Chen didn't know was that Marcus had already studied satellite weather reports, recent insurgent activity in the area, and the latest intelligence briefings that he still had access to through old contacts. She didn't know that the seemingly casual way he chose their route involved avoiding 3 different areas where hostile forces had been spotted in the past week. As they drove through the outskirts of Jalalabad, Dr. Chen chatted about her patients from the previous week. She told Marcus about the little girl with the broken arm who had been so brave during treatment, and the elderly man with diabetes who was finally getting his blood sugar under control. Marcus listened and nodded, but part of his mind was constantly scanning their surroundings.
The road began to climb into the mountains, winding through terrain that was both beautiful and dangerous. Ancient peaks rose around them like sleeping giants, their faces scarred by decades of conflict. Marcus knew this landscape well, though he had never told anyone at IMRO about his previous missions in these same mountains. 2 hours into their journey, they encountered their first checkpoint. Afghan National Army soldiers waved them down at a small outpost built into the side of the mountain. Marcus pulled over and rolled down his window, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. "Medical convoy," he said in fluent Dari, another skill that surprised his colleagues. "Bound for Khost Matun with supplies for the clinic." The young sergeant approached the vehicle and examined their papers. Marcus watched the soldier's eyes, noting the nervous way he kept glancing at the ridgeline above them. Something was making the Afghan forces nervous, but Marcus didn't ask what. In his experience,
Sometimes it was better not to know the details that might make you change a mission that needed to be completed.
After a brief inspection of their cargo, they were waved through. As they drove away from the checkpoint, Dr.
Chen commented on how tense the soldiers seemed. "They've been having trouble with insurgent activity lately," Marcus said, keeping his voice casual.
"Nothing to worry about, they're just being careful." What he didn't tell her was that his old contacts had warned him about increased Taliban movement in the area.
3 convoys had been attacked in the past month, though none had been medical vehicles. Marcus had calculated the risks and decided the mission was still viable, but he had also made some preparations that his colleagues would have found surprising.
Hidden beneath his seat was a Glock 19 pistol, loaded with 17 rounds of hollow-point ammunition. Strapped to his ankle was a combat knife, and in a concealed pocket of his jacket was a small device that could call in military assistance from any NATO force in the region.
These weren't standard equipment for an IMRO driver, but Marcus had learned long ago that hope for the best while preparing for the worst was the only sensible approach in a war zone. The road continued to climb, becoming narrower and more treacherous with each mile.
They passed through small villages where children ran alongside the truck, waving and shouting. Dr. Chen always waved back, delighted by their enthusiasm. Marcus waved too, but his eyes were on the rooftops and the shadowed doorways, looking for anything that didn't belong.
As they approached a particularly narrow section of road carved into the mountainside, Marcus felt the familiar tingle at the base of his skull that had kept him alive through dozens of missions. Something was wrong. The birds had stopped singing. The usual sounds of insects and small animals had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. He slowed the truck slightly, his eyes scanning the rocks above them.
Dr. Chen was reading through patient files and didn't notice the change in their speed or the sudden tension in Marcus's posture. She had no way of knowing that the quiet, gentle man beside her had just shifted into a combat mindset that had been forged in the fire of some of the world's most dangerous missions. The attack came without warning, as attacks always do. One moment they were driving peacefully through a spectacular mountain landscape, and the next moment the world exploded into chaos and violence.
The first rocket-propelled grenade struck the road 50 meters ahead of them, sending up a shower of rocks and dirt. Marcus's training took over instantly, his foot slamming on the brakes as he threw the truck into reverse.
"Get down," he shouted to Dr. Chen, who was staring in shock at the smoke rising from the crater in their path. Automatic weapons fire erupted from positions Marcus had already identified in the rocks above them. Bullets sparked off the road and punched through the thin metal of the truck's body.
Dr. Chen screamed and dove toward the floor, finally understanding that their peaceful mission had just become a fight for survival.
Marcus spun the wheel hard left, using a technique he had learned in evasive driving courses, and managed to get the truck behind a large boulder just as a second RPG streaked past where they had been seconds before. His mind was already working through possibilities, calculating odds, and preparing for what he knew was coming next. The insurgents would try to box them in, cut off their escape route, and then move in to capture or kill them. It was a textbook ambush, well planned and well executed.
Against a normal medical convoy, it would have been devastatingly effective. But they had made one critical mistake.
They had attacked the wrong driver. Marcus reached under his seat and drew his Glock, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. Dr. Chen stared at him in disbelief, seeing a side of her gentle colleague that she could never have imagined. "Marcus, what are you doing? Where did you get that gun?" "Stay down, Doc," Marcus said, his voice completely calm despite the bullets flying around them. "And trust me, we're going to get through this." The transformation was remarkable. The soft-spoken humanitarian who had driven her safely through dozens of missions was gone, replaced by something harder, more dangerous, more focused. Chen realized she had been sharing a truck for 8 months with a complete stranger. Through the radio chatter in the distance, Marcus could hear the insurgents coordinating their attack in Pashto, a language he understood perfectly. They had at least 12 fighters positioned on the high ground, with more moving to block the road behind them. They were confident, professional, and completely unaware that they had just awakened something they couldn't handle. Marcus checked his watch and smiled grimly. In his old life, he had been extracted from worse situations than this. The difference was that in his old life, the mission always came first, and collateral damage was an acceptable cost of war. This time, his mission was to protect the innocent woman beside him and get their medical supplies to people who desperately needed them. This time, he wasn't fighting for Queen and country. He was fighting for something more personal, more immediate, more important. The insurgents began their advance down the mountainside, moving with tactical precision that suggested military training. They were taking their time,
confident that their prey was trapped and helpless.
They had no idea that the driver of the medical convoy was already planning their destruction. Marcus Thompson, former SAS operative, had spent 8 months learning to be a peaceful man.
But some lessons run deeper than others, and some skills never really fade away. The war was about to come home to the men who had started it. The sound of boots on gravel told Marcus everything he needed to know about his attackers. They moved with discipline, spacing themselves properly, communicating through hand signals.
These weren't desperate villagers or untrained fighters. These were professionals, probably former military, possibly foreign-trained. Dr. Chen huddled on the floor of the truck, her medical bag clutched to her chest like a shield.
Her world had been turned upside down in the space of 30 seconds. The man she thought she knew, the gentle driver who always helped her carry supplies and never raised his voice, was crouched beside her with a pistol in his hands and ice in his eyes.
"Marcus, who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Someone I used to be," Marcus replied, his attention focused on the advancing fighters.
"Someone I hoped I'd never have to be again." Through a gap in the rocks, Marcus counted at least 8 insurgents working their way down the mountainside toward their position. They moved in a standard tactical formation, with covering fire provided by positions higher up the slope.
It was professional work, the kind of operation that would have impressed him if he weren't on the receiving end of it. Marcus activated the emergency beacon hidden in his jacket, sending out a distress signal that would alert both IMRO headquarters and certain other parties who maintained an interest in his welfare.
Help would come, but it would take time. Probably more time than they had.
The truck shuddered as another burst of automatic weapons fire punched through the engine block. Steam began rising from under the hood, and Marcus knew their mobile cover wouldn't last much longer. They needed to move, but moving meant exposing themselves to the crossfire that the insurgents had so carefully established. "Doc, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, never taking his eyes off the approaching fighters. "In about 30 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, I want you to run to that cluster of rocks about 50 meters to our right. Keep your head down, move fast, and don't look back. What about you?" Marcus checked the spare magazines in his jacket and chambered a round in the Glock. "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Marcus wasn't planning to run. He was planning to do what he had been trained to do for 2 decades of military service. Eliminate the threat. The lead insurgent appeared around the edge of their rocky shelter, his AK-47 raised and ready. He was young, maybe 25, with the lean build and hard eyes of a seasoned fighter. He had probably killed before, probably felt confident in his abilities and the support of his team. He had never faced anyone like Marcus Thompson. The insurgent's mistake was assuming that his enemy was still where he had last seen him. Marcus had moved the moment he heard footsteps, using skills learned in urban warfare training to position himself behind a different boulder. When the fighter came around, what he thought was Marcus's cover, he found empty space. Marcus shot him twice in the chest from a distance of 3 meters. The sound of the Glock was sharp and final in the mountain air. The insurgent dropped without a sound, his weapon clattering on the rocks. The other fighters reacted instantly, pouring automatic fire into the area where their comrade had fallen. But Marcus was already moving, using the terrain and his knowledge of small unit tactics to stay ahead of their response. "Now, Doc, move. Dr. Gabeno says war-torn." Chen bolted from the truck, running as fast as she could toward the rocks Marcus had indicated. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet, but fear gave her speed she didn't know she possessed. She reached cover just as Marcus opened fire on 2 more insurgents who had tried to flank their position. From his new position behind a fallen tree, Marcus could see the full scope of the ambush. 12 fighters, just as he had estimated from their radio chatter. They had positioned themselves well, controlling the high ground and blocking both directions of the mountain road. Against a normal convoy, it would have been overkill. Marcus smiled grimly as he lined up his next shot. In his old unit, they had called him the Ghost because of his ability to appear where the enemy least expected him. It had been 8 months since he had used those skills, but muscle memory and survival instinct were taking over now. The 4th insurgent fell with a bullet through the throat, his scream cut short by Marcus's precise marksmanship. The others began to realize that something had gone very wrong with their carefully planned operation. Their radio chatter became more frantic, more confused. Marcus moved again, staying low and using the natural cover of the mountainside. He had studied this terrain during his planning for the medical mission, noting escape routes and defensive positions out of habit rather than necessity. Now that preparation was keeping him alive.
From the rocks where Dr. Chen was hiding, he could hear her sobbing quietly. She was a doctor trained to save lives, not to witness the violent taking of them. Marcus felt a stab of regret that she had to see this side of the world. This side of him.
But regret was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. 2 more insurgents tried to advance on Dr.
Chen's position, thinking the lone gunman was focused elsewhere.
They learned their mistake when Marcus put 3 rounds into each of them from an angle they hadn't considered. His tactical awareness, honed by years of combat in similar terrain, allowed him to track multiple targets while maintaining fire discipline.
The remaining fighters began to retreat up the mountainside, their confidence shattered by the loss of half their number in less than 5 minutes. They had expected an easy target, probably planned to be back at their base camp by evening with stories of another successful ambush.
Instead, they were running for their lives from an enemy they couldn't see until it was too late. Marcus could have let them go.
His immediate mission was to protect Dr. Chen and extract them both safely from the ambush site. But 20 years of military experience had taught him that a partially defeated enemy was a dangerous enemy. These men would regroup, plan another attack, target another convoy.
Next time, the driver might not be able to fight back. He activated his throat microphone, a piece of equipment that Dr. Plague Chen hadn't noticed during their months of working together. Overwatch, this is Ghost 7. He spoke quietly, using call signs that hadn't been heard on this frequency for nearly a year.
I have multiple hostiles in retreat heading northeast up the mountain face. Request immediate support for cleanup operation.
The response came immediately in a voice Marcus recognized from his old unit. Ghost 7, this is Overwatch. Confirm your status.
You've been dark for 8 months. Status is operational.
I have a civilian to protect and hostiles to neutralize. Need a full cleanup, no survivors to report back to their handlers. There was a pause, then, understood Ghost 7.
Predator drone is inbound. ETA 4 minutes.
Paint the targets. Marcus smiled for the first time since the attack began. He pulled out a small laser designator and began marking the retreating insurgents for the drone strike that was already screaming toward their position at 500 miles per hour.
Dr. Chen heard him speaking but couldn't make out the words. She saw him pointing some kind of device at the mountainside and wondered what new impossibility she was witnessing.
The gentleman who had driven her safely through dozens of missions seemed to have access to military equipment and communications that she couldn't begin to understand. The Predator drone arrived with a sound like distant thunder. To Dr. Chen, it was just noise in the sky. To Marcus, it was the voice of technological superiority that had kept American and British forces alive in conflicts around the world. The Hellfire missiles found their targets with precision that was almost artistic. The 6 surviving insurgents simply ceased to exist, vaporized by explosives that left nothing behind but scattered rocks and silence. Marcus lowered the laser designator and spoke into his microphone again. Overwatch, this is Ghost 7. Target area is clean. Requesting immediate extraction for civilian and priority transport for medical supplies. Copy that, Ghost 7. Extraction team is inbound. ETA 12 minutes. Good to have you back.
Marcus turned off the radio and walked back to where Dr. Chen was hiding.
She looked up at him with eyes that held fear, confusion, and a dozen questions she didn't know how to ask. It's over, Marcus said, holstering his pistol and extending his hand to help her up. You're safe now.
Dr. Chen took his hand but couldn't stop staring at his face. The transformation she had witnessed was complete now. The mild-mannered humanitarian was gone, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, more competent than anyone she had ever met.
Who are you really? She asked. Marcus looked out over the mountain landscape where 12 men had died in the space of 10 minutes. Some by his hand, some by the instruments of war he still had access to, despite his official retirement.
I'm someone who used to fight monsters, he said quietly. I thought I was done with that life.
Turns out the monsters weren't done with me. In the distance, they could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. Dr. Chen's nightmare was ending, but Marcus knew that his quiet new life had just come to a permanent close. Word would spread about what had happened here. Other enemies would learn that the British SASS had an asset in the humanitarian community. His cover was blown, his peaceful existence over.
But looking at Dr. Chen's frightened but alive face, looking at the medical supplies that would still reach the people who needed them, Marcus found that he didn't regret his choice.
Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant returning to a life he had tried to leave behind. The war had found him again, but this time he was fighting for something more important than politics or territory. This time he was fighting for the idea that good people should be able to do good work without fear. As the rescue helicopters landed in a whirlwind of dust and noise, Marcus Thompson began planning his next move.
The quiet life was over, but the mission was just beginning.
The helicopter that landed to extract them wasn't from the International Medical Relief Organization.
Dr. Chen noticed that immediately. The aircraft bore no humanitarian markings, and the soldiers who emerged were equipped with weapons and gear that seemed far beyond what a simple rescue mission would require. Marcus helped her toward the helicopter, his demeanor now completely different from the man she thought she had known for 8 months. He moved with military precision, spoke in clipped sentences to the soldiers, and seemed completely comfortable in what was clearly a combat environment.
Marcus, these aren't IMRO people.
Dr.
Chen said, having to shout over the noise of the rotor blades. No, Marcus replied, guiding her toward the open door of the aircraft. They're friends of mine from my previous job. The flight to the secure compound took 20 minutes, during which Dr. Chen sat in stunned silence while Marcus briefed the team commander on what had happened. She caught fragments of military jargon, unit designations, and tactical assessments that painted a picture of competence and experience that was impossible to reconcile with the gentle driver she had worked alongside. When they landed, Dr. Chen was escorted to a debriefing room while Marcus disappeared with the military personnel. She sat alone for nearly an hour, drinking coffee that tasted better than anything they had at the IMRO compound, and trying to process what she had witnessed.
The man who entered the room was older than Marcus, with gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He introduced himself as Colonel James Fletcher, British Army Intelligence, and his first words were an apology.
Dr. Chen, I want to apologize for the deception you've been subjected to over the past 8 months.
Marcus Thompson is not just a humanitarian driver, and his presence at your organization was not entirely coincidental.
Dr. Successive. Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning.
What do you mean?
Colonel Fletcher sat across from her and opened a file folder. Marcus is a former Special Air Service operative, one of our most decorated soldiers. He served with distinction in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and several other locations that remain classified.
He was medically retired 8 months ago after suffering severe PTSD following a mission that went wrong.
The revelation hit Dr. Chen like a physical blow. She thought about all the conversations they had shared, all the moments when she had felt safe because of his presence, all the times she had wondered why he seemed so alert, so aware of their surroundings. You planted him in our organization, she said, her voice rising with anger.
You used us as cover for some kind of military operation. No, Fletcher said firmly. We didn't plant him anywhere.
Marcus chose to work for IMRO as part of his recovery process. His therapist recommended humanitarian work as a way to rebuild his sense of purpose after leaving military service. We simply kept an eye on him.
But you were tracking him. You knew where he was. Dr. Chen, Marcus Thompson was one of our most valuable assets for 15 years. He has knowledge and experience that makes him a target for enemy intelligence services and terrorist organizations around the world.
We couldn't simply lose track of him even after his retirement. Fletcher showed her a photograph from Marcus's file. It showed a younger version of the man she knew, but dressed in military fatigues and carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. His eyes were the same, though. Intelligent, alert, and somehow sad. What happened to him? Why did he leave military service? Fletcher hesitated before answering. Marcus led a rescue mission to extract a group of aid workers who had been captured by ISIS in Syria. The intelligence was wrong. The aid workers had already been executed, and the compound was being used as a trap to capture or kill whoever came for them.
Marcus got his team out, but not before witnessing things that no one should have to see. The colonel closed the file and leaned back in his chair. He blamed himself for not saving the civilians, even though the mission was compromised from the beginning.
The nightmares, the guilt, the inability to sleep, it all caught up with him eventually. His commanding officer recommended medical retirement.
Dr. Chen thought about the gentleman who had driven her through dangerous territories, who had always seemed slightly on edge but never complained, who had talked about finding peace in helping people instead of hurting them.
He never told me any of this. Would you have trusted him if he had? Would you have felt safe working with someone you knew was trained to kill? The honesty of the question stung because Dr. Chen realized the answer was probably no. She would have been afraid, suspicious, unable to see past the violence in his background to the person he was trying to become. What happens now? She asked. Now we have a problem, Fletcher admitted. The attack on your convoy wasn't random. Our intelligence suggests it was specifically targeted based on information about your route and timing. Someone knew exactly where you would be and when you would be there. Dr. Chen felt cold fear creeping up her spine. Someone at IMRO gave them information? We are investigating that possibility. But there's another problem. The men who attacked you today were part of a larger organization with connections to several terrorist groups in the region.
By defending himself and protecting you, Marcus has essentially declared war on people who don't forgive or forget. Fletcher stood and moved to a window that looked out over the compound.
Dr. Chen could see soldiers moving with purpose across the courtyard, and she realized she was in the middle of a military base.
Marcus can't go back to his quiet life now, Fletcher continued. His cover is blown, his location is compromised, and there are people who will want revenge for what happened today. He'll need to disappear again, take on a new identity, start over somewhere else.
What about Imro? What about the work we were doing? The organization will continue its mission, but with better security protocols and more careful vetting of personnel. As for you, Dr. Chen, you have a choice to make. Fletcher turned back to face her, and she could see the weight of difficult decisions in his expression. You know too much now to simply return to your normal life without precautions. You've seen classified military operations, you know about Marcus's real identity, and you're a potential target for retaliation by the same groups that attacked you today. Doctor.
Chen felt her world spinning out of control. Are you saying I can't go back to my work? I'm saying you can't go back safely without protection.
We can offer you that protection, but it would mean working with us, accepting certain restrictions on your movements and communications. The door opened, and Marcus entered the room. He looked tired, older somehow, as if the events of the day had aged him years in a matter of hours. He sat down next to Dr.
Chen, and for a moment they just looked at each other. I'm sorry, he said finally.
I never wanted you to see that side of me. I never wanted any of this to touch you. Why didn't you tell me who you really were? Marcus was quiet for a long time before answering. Because I wanted to be the person you saw, the gentle driver who helped carry medical supplies and never raised his voice. I wanted to believe that person was real, that I could leave the other guy behind and just be someone who helped people instead of hurting them. Chen reached over and took his hand. Despite everything she had learned, despite the violence she had witnessed, she could still see the man who had patiently taught her basic phrases in Dari and had always made sure she felt safe during their missions.
He is real, she said. That person is real too.
Colonel Fletcher cleared his throat.
I hate to interrupt, but we have urgent decisions to make. Marcus, your former unit wants you back.
Given what happened today and what our intelligence suggests is coming, we need someone with your skills and experience in the field. Marcus looked at Dr.
Chen, then at his former commander. What's coming? The group that attacked you today is planning something bigger.
We have intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated attack on humanitarian operations throughout the region. They want to drive out the aid organizations, create a void they can fill with their own people.
Fletcher spread a map on the table, marked with red dots that indicated known terrorist positions and suspected targets. They see humanitarian workers as soft targets, easy propaganda victories. But after what you did today, they also see them as potentially dangerous. They're going to escalate their operations, try to eliminate the threat they think you represent.
Dr. Chen studied the map and felt a chill of recognition.
Many of the red dots were near clinics and hospitals where she had worked, villages where she had treated patients who had no other access to medical care. You're saying they'll target other medical convoys? We're saying they'll target anyone associated with humanitarian operations in this region.
That includes your colleagues at IMRO, other aid organizations, and local civilians who cooperate with international relief efforts. Marcus stood and walked to the map, his military training taking over as he studied the tactical situation.
What do you need from me? Fletcher smiled grimly. We need the Ghost back in action. Not just to stop these attacks, but to send a message that targeting humanitarian workers comes with consequences these people can't handle.
Doctor. Chen looked between the two men and realized she was watching a critical moment in both of their lives.
Marcus was being offered a return to the world he had tried to leave behind, a chance to use his skills for something he believed in. Fletcher was asking him to become a weapon again, but this time in defense of people like her.
If I do this, Marcus said slowly, I want Dr. Chen reassigned somewhere safe.
I want guarantees that she won't be targeted because of what happened today. That can be arranged, and I want full operational control.
No politicians second-guessing decisions in the field. No rules of engagement that protect the enemy. Fletcher nodded. You'll have carte blanche to deal with the threat as you see fit. Marcus turned to Dr. Chen, and she could see the internal struggle in his eyes. He wanted to return to his peaceful life, but he also knew that life was impossible now. The choice was between running and hiding,
were standing and fighting for something that mattered.
What do you think, Doc? Should the gentle humanitarian driver stay retired, or should the ghost come back to protect people like you?
Doctor. Chen thought about the patients in the villages they served, the children who ran alongside their truck, the elderly people who had no other access to medical care. She thought about other doctors and nurses working in dangerous places around the world, trusting that their humanitarian mission would protect them from the violence around them.
I think, she said carefully, that sometimes gentle people need someone willing to be dangerous on their behalf. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the attack, she saw a glimpse of the man she had worked with for 8 months. Then I guess the ghost is coming out of retirement. Colonel Fletcher closed the file and stood up. Welcome back, Marcus. We have a lot of work to do.
3 weeks after the convoy attack, Marcus Thompson no longer existed. The mild-mannered driver who had worked for the International Medical Relief Organization had been replaced by something harder, more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. The transformation back to his operational mindset had been faster than anyone expected, including Marcus himself. Dr. Sarah Chen had been relocated to a medical facility in Germany where she continued her humanitarian work under a new identity and round-the-clock protection. She thought about Marcus daily, wondering if she would ever see the gentle side of him again, or if that person had been permanently lost in the mountains of Afghanistan. Marcus, meanwhile, had become the ghost once more. The safe house in Kabul where he now operated bore no resemblance to the simple apartment he had maintained during his civilian life. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and intelligence reports. Communications equipment that could reach satellites anywhere in the world hummed quietly in the corner. Weapons that didn't officially exist were stored in custom cases along one wall. Colonel Fletcher visited him there on a cold morning in November, bringing coffee and the latest intelligence reports from the field. Marcus was studying surveillance footage from a drone, tracking the movement of suspected terrorists through a mountain village 200 kilometers away.
How are you adjusting to being back in the game? Fletcher asked. Marcus didn't look up from the screens. Like riding a bicycle. Once you learn to kill people professionally, you never really forget how.
Any regrets about leaving your quiet life behind? Marcus paused the video and turned to face his commander. The change in him was remarkable. The gentle expression that Dr. Chen had known was gone, replaced by the cold focus of a predator. Every morning I wake up and remember that good people are dying because I tried to pretend I was something I'm not. Dr. Chen almost died because I thought I could play civilian while evil people made plans. No, Colonel, I don't have regrets. I have targets. Fletcher nodded and spread a new set of photographs on the table. Then you'll be interested in these. We've identified the leadership structure of the organization that attacked your convoy. 12 men, all with military backgrounds, all with significant operational experience. Marcus studied the faces in the photographs. Some were familiar from previous missions. Others were new players in an old game. All of them had made the mistake of threatening people under his protection. What's the operational parameters? Full sanction. These men are planning coordinated attacks on humanitarian operations across 3 countries. The politicians have decided that diplomatic solutions aren't working fast enough. You have authorization to eliminate the threat by any means necessary. Fletcher handed Marcus a secure phone containing encrypted communications, bank account numbers, and contact information for assets throughout the region. You'll be working alone as you prefer. No oversight, no backup unless you specifically request it. The only requirement is results. Marcus pocketed the phone and returned to the surveillance footage. Timeline? The intelligence suggests they're planning their next major operation for December 15th. That gives you 3 weeks to disrupt their organization. More than enough time. Fletcher stood to leave, then paused at the door. Marcus, I know you blamed yourself for what happened to Dr. Chen, for putting her in danger. But what you're doing now, this mission, it's going to save lives, probably hundreds of lives. Marcus continued studying the video footage. I know. That's why I'm going to be very thorough. The first target was Ahmed Nazir, a former Afghan army officer who had defected to the Taliban and was now organizing attacks on NGO facilities. Intelligence placed him in a compound near the Pakistani border, surrounded by loyalists and protected by terrain that made conventional military assault nearly impossible. For a conventional military assault, Marcus wasn't conventional military anymore. He infiltrated the compound at 3 a.m, moving through the darkness like his namesake suggested. 20 years of training in the world's most elite special forces unit had taught him to become invisible when necessary, to move through hostile territory without leaving a trace. The guards never saw him coming. One moment they were at their posts, alert and armed, and the next moment they were unconscious, their weapons secured and their communications disabled.
Marcus had learned long ago that dead guards were eventually discovered, but sleeping guards could buy him hours of operational time. He found Ahmed Nazir in the main building, sleeping peacefully in a bed surrounded by maps of humanitarian facilities and photographs of aid workers. The planning for future attacks was spread across his desk like blueprints for mass murder. Marcus woke him with the barrel of his pistol pressed against his forehead.
Ahmed Nazir, Marcus said quietly in perfect Pashto. You made a mistake 3 weeks ago. Nazir's eyes went wide as he recognized the face from intelligence photos his organization had been circulating. They had been looking for the mysterious driver who had killed 12 of their men, but they hadn't expected him to come looking for them. You are the ghost, Nazir whispered.
I was retired, Marcus replied. But your people attacked the wrong convoy. Now I'm back. Marcus spent 20 minutes with Ahmed Nazir before the man died. In that time, he extracted information about the organization's structure, their future plans, and the locations of their leadership. When he left the compound, the guards were still unconscious, and Ahmed Nazir looked like he had died peacefully in his sleep. No one would discover the body for hours, and by then Marcus would be moving on his next target. The second target was more challenging. Hassan Malik was a former Syrian intelligence officer who had brought European training and sophisticated tactics to the terrorist organization. He moved constantly, used multiple safe houses, and surrounded himself with professional security that rivaled government protection details. Marcus tracked him for 4 days, learning his patterns and identifying his vulnerabilities. The break came when intelligence revealed that Malik was planning to attend a secret meeting with arms dealers in a remote location near the Iranian border.
The arms dealers arrived at the designated meeting point to find Hassan Malik's body hanging from a tree, with a note attached that simply said, "Courtesy of the Ghost." His security team had vanished without a trace, along with the weapons shipment they had been there to purchase. Word began to spread through the terrorist networks that something was hunting their leadership.
The Ghost, who had supposedly retired from British Special Forces, was back in action and systematically dismantling their organization. Paranoia began to set in among the remaining leaders. The third target tried to flee to Pakistan, but Marcus was waiting for him at the border crossing. The fourth target surrounded himself with 24 bodyguards but woke up to find them all unconscious and the Ghost sitting in his bedroom.
The fifth target hired professional assassins for protection, but they became targets themselves when they proved unable to stop what was coming for their employer.
By December 10th, 5 days before the planned coordinated attacks, the terrorist organization had lost 8 of its 12 leaders. The survivors were scattered, terrified, and completely unable to carry out their original mission. Their carefully planned assault on humanitarian operations had been reduced to a few desperate men hiding in caves and safe houses. Colonel Fletcher received regular updates on Marcus's progress through encrypted communications, but no direct contact. The Ghost was operating in the shadows of a shadow war, beyond the reach of conventional military oversight or political interference. Dr. Chen, safely relocated in Germany, read news reports about unexplained deaths and disappearances among terrorist leaders in Afghanistan and Pakistan. She didn't need official confirmation to know that Marcus was keeping his promise to protect humanitarian workers. The gentle driver she had known was gone, but the man who had taken his place was fighting for everything they had both believed in. On December 12th, Marcus made contact with Colonel Fletcher for the first time since beginning his mission.
Ghost 7 to Overwatch. Go ahead, Ghost 7. Mission 75% complete. Remaining targets have gone to ground, but I have their locations.
Request permission to finish the job. Fletcher paused before responding. In 3 weeks, Marcus had accomplished what an entire military campaign might have taken months to achieve. The terrorist organization that had threatened humanitarian operations across the region was essentially destroyed. Permission granted. Complete your mission and come home.
Negative on coming home, Overwatch. I found something bigger. These weren't independent actors, they were being funded and directed by a state sponsor. I'm going to need more time to follow this to its source.
Fletcher felt a chill of recognition.
He had seen this before with Marcus. The inability to leave a job half-finished. The compulsion to follow evil to its root and eliminate it completely.
Ghost 7, your mission parameters were specific to the terrorist organization.
You're not authorized to engage state-level targets. Then get me authorization. Someone paid for the attack on Dr. Chen's convoy. Someone gave these people the intelligence they needed to target humanitarian operations. Until I find that someone, this mission isn't complete. The line went silent for several minutes while Fletcher considered the implications.
Marcus had gone beyond his original orders and was now proposing to take on enemies that could start international incidents. Stand by, Ghost 7.
I need to make some phone calls.
Marcus waited in a safe house overlooking the border between Afghanistan and Iran, watching the movements of the remaining terrorist leaders through high-powered binoculars. He knew they were planning to flee the country, to disappear into new identities and rebuild their organization somewhere else. He also knew he wasn't going to let that happen. When Fletcher finally responded, his voice carried the weight of conversations with the highest levels of government. Ghost 7, you have expanded authorization. Find the source, neutralize the threat, and close this permanently. Rules of engagement are wide open. Political considerations are suspended. Do whatever it takes. Marcus smiled as he began preparations for what would be the most dangerous phase of his mission. The terrorist leaders were small fish compared to what was coming next. He was about to go hunting for the whale that had been swimming in the deep waters of international terrorism, funding attacks on innocent people. The Ghost was about to become something even more dangerous, a man with nothing to lose and unlimited authority to act. Dr. Chen would probably never see the gentle humanitarian driver again, but because of what that driver was becoming, thousands of other aid workers would be able to do their jobs without fear. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as he checked his weapons and communications gear, the only way to protect innocence was to embrace the darkness that threatened it. The real war was just beginning. 6 months later, the medical clinic in the mountain village of Khost Matun was bustling with activity. Children lined up for vaccinations. Elderly patients received treatment for chronic conditions, and a team of international doctors worked alongside local health workers to provide care that had been impossible just a year before. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the doorway of the clinic, watching the organized chaos of a successful medical mission. It had taken her months to get permission to return to Afghanistan, and even longer to convince her supervisors that she was ready for field work again. But standing here now, seeing the faces of patients who were receiving care because humanitarian workers could operate without fear, she knew the fight had been worth it. The security situation in the region had improved dramatically since December. Attacks on humanitarian convoys had virtually disappeared, and aid organizations were able to expand their operations into areas that had been too dangerous to access before. The official reports credited improved coordination between NATO forces and Afghan government troops, but Dr. Chen knew the real reason for the change. Marcus Thompson had kept his promise. The newspaper reports had been scattered and often contradictory, but when pieced together they told a remarkable story. A weapons manufacturing facility in Iran had exploded under mysterious circumstances. 3 high-ranking officials in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard had died in what appeared to be unrelated accidents. Bank accounts funding terrorist operations throughout the region had been mysteriously emptied, their contents transferred to humanitarian organizations. Most telling of all, intercepted communications between terrorist groups spoke of a phantom who appeared without warning and disappeared without trace, leaving behind only the bodies of those who threatened innocent civilians. They called him the Ghost, and even hardened fighters refused missions when they heard he might be in the area. Dr. Sissel. Chen had received only one communication from Marcus since their separation in November, a simple text message that arrived on her secure phone 3 months earlier, package delivered. Doc safe to work anywhere now. -M. She had tried to respond, to ask about his safety and his plans, but the number was no longer active. Marcus had disappeared back into the shadows, and she had no way to reach him or even confirm that he was still alive. A commotion outside the clinic drew her attention. A convoy of vehicles was approaching on the mountain road, moving with a careful precision that indicated either military or security forces. Dr. Forstad and her voice held too. Chen felt a moment of alarm before she recognized the flags and markings of the International Medical Relief Organization. The lead vehicle stopped in front of the clinic, and Dr. Definizio Sanquier. Chen was surprised to see Colonel Fletcher emerge from the passenger seat. He was dressed in civilian clothes, but his bearing and the way the other passengers deferred to him made his military background obvious. Dr. Chen, Fletcher said, approaching with a slight smile. I hope you don't mind an unannounced visit. I was in the area and wanted to check on your progress. Dr. Conning died separately. Chen knew that Fletcher was never in the area without specific purpose. His presence here meant something significant was happening. Of course, Colonel. Would you like a tour of the facility? Actually, I was hoping we could talk privately. There's something I need to discuss with you. They walked to a quiet area behind the clinic, where benches had been placed under a large tree that provided shade from the afternoon sun. Fletcher looked older than when Dr. Chen had last seen him, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. How much do you know about what's happened since December? Fletcher asked. Only what I've been able to piece together from news reports and intelligence briefings. Marcus completed his mission. The terrorist organization was eliminated. And somehow the funding source was neutralized as well. Fletcher nodded slowly.
That's the official version. The reality was somewhat more complicated. He handed her a sealed envelope bearing classification markings she didn't recognize. This is Marcus's final report. I'm sharing it with you because you're one of the few people who knew him both as a civilian and as an operative. You have a unique perspective on what he sacrificed to complete this mission. Dr. Chen opened the envelope with trembling hands. The report was typed on official letterhead, but she could see Marcus's personality in the precise, understated language. Mission parameters evolved beyond original scope when investigation revealed state-sponsored funding of terrorist operations targeting humanitarian missions. Primary source identified as Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, operating through intermediaries in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Elimination of funding source required infiltration of Iranian territory and neutralization of 3 key personnel. Mission successful but resulted in compromise of operational identity. Extraction impossible due to Iranian security response. Current status: deep cover in Central Asian region. Operational capacity maintained but civilian identity permanently compromised. Recommend no further contact to protect security of IMRO operations. Personal note: Dr. Chen and colleagues can now operate without fear of coordinated attacks. Mission objective achieved. No regrets. Dr. Chen read the report twice before the full implications sank in. Marcus had not just eliminated the terrorist leaders. He had traced their funding back to its source and taken actions that could have triggered an international incident. He had accomplished something that entire intelligence agencies had failed to achieve, but the cost had been his freedom to ever return to a normal life. Where is he now? She asked. Fletcher was quiet for a long time before answering. We don't know. After he completed the mission in Iran, he disappeared. No communications, no sightings, no intelligence reports. Either he's dead, or he's gone so deep underground that even we can't find him. But you don't think he's dead. Marcus Thompson is the most resourceful operative I've ever commanded. If anyone could survive going off the grid in hostile territory, it would be him. But the man you knew, the gentle driver who wanted to help people, that person is gone forever. Dr. Chen felt tears welling up in her eyes as she thought about the man who had saved her life and then sacrificed his own future to protect people he would never meet. Does he know that his mission worked? Does he know that we're able to operate safely now? I hope so. I hope somewhere out there he's reading reports about successful humanitarian missions and knowing that he made them possible. Fletcher stood to leave, then paused and handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. This arrived at our headquarters last week. It was addressed to you, but there was no return address and no way to verify the sender. Our security people cleared it, but they couldn't determine its origin. Dr. Chen unwrapped the package to find a small wooden carving of a dove, the kind that local artisans sold in the markets of Jalalabad. There was no note, no signature, nothing to identify the sender. 2. But somehow she knew it was from Marcus. He's alive, she said with certainty.
How can you be sure? Dr. Chen held up the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood.
Because this represents what he was trying to become, peaceful, gentle, helping people instead of hurting them. He's telling me that part of him survived, even after everything that happened. Fletcher nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps the man you knew is still out there somewhere, just wearing a different face. After Fletcher's convoy departed, Dr. Chen returned to her work at the clinic. She treated patients, supervised the medical staff, and coordinated with other aid organizations in the region. But part of her mind was always wondering about Marcus, hoping that wherever he was, he had found some measure of peace. 3 days later, she received an unexpected visitor. A local man in his 40s approached the clinic, carrying a young girl who appeared to be suffering from a severe infection. He spoke limited English, but Dr. Chen's diary had improved significantly since her return to Afghanistan. My daughter is very sick, the man said. The infection is in her blood. I heard there are good doctors here. Dr. Chen examined the girl and immediately recognized the seriousness of her condition. Without prompt treatment with antibiotics, the child would likely die within hours. She began immediate treatment while gathering information about the patient's medical history. What is your daughter's name? Dr. Chen asked as she prepared an IV line. Miriam, the father replied. And my name is Ahmad. We have traveled many days to reach your clinic. Something about the man's voice made Dr. Chen look at him more closely. There was something familiar in his posture, in the way he watched her work with calm efficiency, despite his obvious worry about his daughter. Have we met before?
Dr. Weaver made the doctor's official effect.
Chen asked. Ahmad smiled slightly, and for just a moment she caught a glimpse of something in his eyes that reminded her of someone else.
No, doctor. I am just a father who heard that there were good people here who helped children without asking for payment. Doctor.
Chen continued treating Miriam, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Ahmad than appeared on the surface. He spoke like an educated man despite his rough appearance, and there was alertness in his movements that seemed inconsistent with his role as a simple village farmer.
Over the next 3 days, as Miriam recovered from her infection, Dr. Chen found herself talking with Ahmad about the region, about the challenges facing rural communities, and about the work of humanitarian organizations.
He seemed remarkably well informed about regional politics and security issues for someone who claimed to be a subsistence farmer. On the morning when Miriam was well enough to travel, Ahmad approached Dr.
Chen as she was preparing discharge papers. "Doctor, I want to thank you for saving my daughter's life. You risked much to come to this place and help people like us." "It's what we're here for," Dr. Chen replied. "Every child deserves access to medical care." Ahmad nodded thoughtfully. "There was a time when people like you could not work safely in these mountains."
But things have changed. Someone fought to make it safe for good people to do good work.
Dr. Chen felt her heart skip a beat. There was something in the way he phrased the comment that seemed too specific, too knowing.
Yes, she said carefully.
"We've been fortunate that the security situation has improved." Ahmed picked up his daughter, who was now alert and smiling, and turned to leave. But at the doorway he paused and looked back at Dr.
Chen, I have a friend who asked me to give you a message if I ever met you, he said quietly.
He wanted you to know that gentle people will always need someone willing to be dangerous on their behalf. But he also wanted you to know that the dangerous person never forgets the gentle people who make the fight worthwhile.
Before Dr. Chen could respond, Ahmad and his daughter were gone, disappearing into the crowd of patients and families outside the clinic.
She ran to the doorway and looked down the mountain road, but saw only ordinary villagers going about their daily business.
That evening, as Dr.
Chen sat outside the clinic watching the sunset over the mountains. She thought about Ahmad's message and the wooden dove that now sat on her desk inside. Somewhere out there, perhaps wearing the face of a village farmer or a traveling merchant, Marcus Thompson was still alive.
Still protecting people like her, but doing it from the shadows where he could never be thanked or acknowledged. She thought about the man who had driven her safely through dozens of missions, who had revealed his deadly skills only when her life was in danger, who had sacrificed his chance at a peaceful life to ensure that others could do peaceful work without fear. The gentle humanitarian driver was gone, but the spirit that had motivated him lived on in the ghost who protected aid workers from the darkness. Dr. Chen smiled as she watched the last light fade from the mountain peaks, knowing that somewhere in those shadows, the Guardian was watching over all of them. The mission was complete, but the man who had completed it would never be able to come home. It was the price he had chosen to pay for a world where good people could do good work without fear. Chen went back inside to check on her patients one last time before bed, carrying with her the knowledge that tomorrow she would wake up in a place made safe by someone who cared enough to become dangerous on behalf of strangers. It was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her, and she would spend the rest of her life trying to be worthy of it. Enemy forces attacked a medical convoy. They never expected the driver.